I think we can be responsible only by looking at design and architecture through the lens of very urgent questions. Whether this being the climate meltdown, whether this is about the life cycle of materials or the innovation of a single material, then yes, I think we have achieved a responsible design.
It's about looking at how we can actually equip people with the tools and the know-how to make sound decisions. So how do we create simplicity? How do we create relevancy and transparency in what we design, in what we create, and what we manufacture that actually inspires a more conscious way of living?
Relates to rethinking how we use material, which material, rethinking how we open up data and the tools we have and build to others. It's also responsible. And in that sense, allow ourselves to rethink and redesign full processes and not focus only on the product, not only on the shape, not only on the design.
Responsible is a term that Donna Haraway coined in her book, Staying with the Trouble. And this term is really quite fascinating in the way that you can break something down to give you this space to think, I can be responsive, but I can also be able to do something. And rather than being responsible, you're enabling that person to kind of make a change.
To be responsible for me is to be able to develop a pleasurable ecology. Without pleasurable ecology, we cannot be responsible towards the planet.
The sustainability aspect is a massive topic that a lot of brands talk about, but often consumers are really overwhelmed by the idea of being sustainable. How do we even give them the tools to do that in the most simplistic way? So it's about demystifying a lot of the things that we know and actually creating experiences where they can engage on a much more sensory level. And that's innate in human nature, that we experience the world through our senses. And through those senses, it allows us to understand things in a much better way than reading some text about, so that we can empower consumers to have a better life at home, to empower consumers to be more sustainable.
The very concept of climate change exists because of the advancement in sensing technologies. So the same technology or the same industrial complex that is contributed to climate change is the reason why we know about it. And this counts for many, many other fields. That's why that entanglement for us is so interesting. What has changed dramatically, I think, is that we are also aware that we are not any longer in the center, that we share this planet from this room to the planet at large with the myriads of other agents that we cooperate with: animal, plants, minerals, chemicals, particles of the atmosphere, everything that basically we inhabit together in this fragile planet. So only by understanding the needs of this expansive idea of communities, we can design a new kind of city, a new kind of home, or a new kind of public space.
So when we look at the sustainability within the home, there are small acts that we can kind of encourage and inspire and empower consumers to do. So if we take IKEA's virtual greenhouse as an example, we delivered very basic, simple workshops that enable people to, for example, grow their own vegetables in their own home, to understanding how to work with food waste within the home. And by doing these simple workshops, allow people to understand that the small acts that we take to be sustainable home doesn't have to be overwhelming. It doesn't have to be a full lifestyle change, but there can be small stages and steps that we take to get to a more sustainable mindset and a more sustainable way of being.
And I think it's this kind of balance between people living on the planet, people using what is available on the planet in a natural way that makes this kind of connection. At its heart, the fact that you can touch something, you can see it's not a kind of being produced in a factory, and it's just, you can see that it's something that's kind of grown in a natural environment and has that connection with the human mind, the human body, and the human way of being.
Whereas in the culture we exist in is a consuming one. And that kind of culture of just consuming and disposing in this kind of cycle of continuously doing that isn't one of a conscious mind. So if we're continuing in that direction of overconsumption and overproduction, there's still a problem in how we relate to materials. We don't have a relationship with materials because language is the barrier. All of these materials have been named something. Wood, metal, plastic, glass, and all of textiles even. And when you enter a materials library, you already have a preconceived idea as to what they're capable of. And that's really still centered around a pre-existing relationship towards those materials. So really, it's about building that bridge. And first it begins with language. So we, rather than using nouns, we use verbs and adjectives and adverbs to kind of understand like, oh, this material can do this. Bringing emotion into the conversation. This material is warm, it has the ability to be flexible, it's transparent, it's soft, and it becomes a bit more subjective and has the ability to be many things. And by humanizing the material, we start to build a relationship that actually is very similar to our own human relationship.
Materials are the base of any product. Main reason why we started 3D printing is because of the need of thinking in a more sustainable way in the building industry. If you think about all the interiors in our industry, which only are being used for 3 to 5 years, that's the average of an interior, then it's taken out and it's all thrown away or burned. That's millions and billions of kilos of waste and CO2, which we have to rethink.
If we look at 3D printing as an example, the whole premise of 3D printing was the idea of reducing waste, right? So, technology does have the possibility of actually minimizing our ecological impact depending on how we choose to use that. But it's not just solely looking at 3D printing as a means, but it's also looking at new kind of manufacturing methods. We need to challenge the traditional norms of how we manufacture. And that's through looking at post-waste, post-consumer waste.
The way that the design process goes is that the materials get positioned towards the end of that journey. And therefore, that material choice isn't necessarily something that is purposeful. So if the material isn't necessarily purposeful, it will obviously incur lots of waste and it becomes expensive for a lot of people and the climate too. Very costly, in fact. So we've redesigned that methodology as a materials first approach. So the material is the enabler to make change, because really everything is centered around that material and the way that it's processed, produced, where it comes from, the supply chains, the way in which we understand them too.
It can also be about looking towards nature as a role model. How do we actually take nature's blueprints and actually look at creating ecological models to produce new materials? We're starting to head towards a lot more when we start to think about the way in which we grow materials within the lab, or the way in which we kind of look at how the properties that nature has, like mycelium within mushrooms, and the sustainable properties that it can to mimic leather. It's important to kind of see nature as part of us rather than as a separate resource, because we recognize that now more than ever, nature does a lot for us. So anything from supporting life to providing us with food and resources to regulating our systems. But also, obviously, during the pandemic, it highlighted that the impact that nature has on our health and well-being, that it also provides us with holistic services as well. So if we want to achieve a balanced economy of energy and materials, we really need to work with nature and not against that. And I really love that, because that really emphasizes the importance that we need to stop seeing ourselves as superior to nature, and that nature is just a resource to cultivate from.
Ecologic Studio is a design innovation firm which is specialized on the integration of biotechnology in the built environment. We like to work with these little organisms, for example, cyanobacteria, and figure out ways of embedding them into the fabric of architecture and even into the objects of everyday life. To begin to redesigning or reimagining the future of our cities.
For an ecology which is not about a checklist, but rather about the interconnection of multiple mind, being this the logical mind and the metalogical mind.
Nature, it's of course green and lush and beautiful, but actually there are sides of nature that are inherently related with processes like the composition or the construction, digestion, that are about breaking down matter and kind of turn it back into nutrient or raw material. And all these aspects of nature have traditionally been erased or at least backsided or sidelined by design and by planning because they were considered in fact unhealthy for humans. And the problem of this is that they have accumulated elsewhere in the maybe out of sight and out of consciousness, but still with a severe impact on the world and on the biosphere. I think that is just another layer of nature, but actually they can be understood as a fertile ground for a new kind of nature to proliferate and to become actually a cradle for our civilization.
There is an element in modern architecture of segregation between the landscape and the architecture, of an aesthetic that is based on the white surface clean of bacteria as the paradigm of beauty. The infrastructure that we inherited from modernity have segregated the urban dweller from area of production and disposal of waste. Nowadays, with biotechnology and nature-based technology, we don't need this segregation. Actually, this segregation is alienating us from the process, alienating the urban dweller from the possibility to intervene in the process, to become creative with the process, to transform the process in a pleasure.
Going through the birth, life, death, and rebirth of material and thinking about the ways in which they can die more healthily is a human responsibility. So if carbon is captured and it's putting pressure on our environment and our health, but it can be applied into another designer. He's been able to capture carbon and apply it into fabric dye and graphite, kind of carbon for pencils, as well as like dye for printing ink also. So it's taking something that's very pressureful and stressful into something that actually has purpose, rebalancing or recalibrating our environment somehow.
We often talk about pollution or pollutants, and if you think from the conceptual point of view, pollutants are by definition negative. No? They are a waste, they are something that is essentially unhealthy to us. But from the perspective of cyanobacteria, for example, NOx's or carbon monoxide, these type of molecules are actually food. They are composed of minerals and gases that these cells are able to remetabolize and use to grow fresh biomass, to reproduce. And this fresh biomass, in turn, is actually potentially raw material for new type of products, like bioplastic products, for example, biodegradable plastic products we can use for creating a new fabric of architecture, if you want. Photosynthetic architecture really is able to convert carbon dioxide and other pollutants in the air into freshly metabolized oxygen and biomass.
So cyber garden is a term that refers to the possibility to garden the city, therefore biological organisms like microalgae or fungi, but also synthetic organisms or form of artificial intelligence. We can take advantage of information technology and digital technology to be able to augment this knowledge. The reading of patterns, of elements that are present in the air through the changing color of the microalgae, but also through data and sensor. So that allows us to develop a completely different understanding of the city as a form of cyber garden. A garden that is more both material, because it changes all the time, but also cyber, because integrate information that are digital. Machine can become part of a more complex ecology, being biological or artificial machine, so extending the definition of machine.
As Actual, we offer circular, customizable architecture products to designers, architects, brands in the market who wants to create their own look and feel for any projects they're working on. We are able with our products to connect to their design processes, building processes, and we offer elements which are designed in a specific way. And with our circular take-back solution, after use, we take the product back. We shred it and we can put it as raw material back into the making process. And that's essential because if you look at wood, for example, if you take it back, you can shred it, but it never becomes the same wooden product. With this material we developed, and we can do this process up to 10 times at the moment already. We can actually shape-shift a product into another product. And that's, I think, very interesting in a constantly changing world, that we offer a circular product which actually allows for quick, agile changes, but in a guilty-free way, because you don't throw a product away. No, you just shape-shift it into another product you need. These are bio-based materials or recycled materials from a waste stream. So I think in general, in the upcoming years, 10 years, it's a very big challenge and exciting challenge actually to think about the materials we all already have on the planet and how to reuse that, to not downgrade the material, but actually keep it on the same quality level. The interesting thing is that it is not only about like design, make, stop. It is a circular way of redesigning the whole process. And because that whole process, because of the robots and the software we use in the production and the manufacturing part, we can connect that back into the design part. So it's a circular loop, not only in materials, but also in products. Because you can imagine that after 2 years of using a product, the product online already became smarter because of the learnings in that 2 years in the process. So this open way of allowing partners and designers to build upon the data we gathered along the years, I think that's something we will keep on pushing, because we cannot do it all by ourselves, right? We need everyone in the value chain and in the to make it more smart, more sustainable, more beautiful.
So the way that technology can be integrated, well, digital technology to be more specific, is the way that all of these materials can be traced, traced back to perhaps their origin, and also like the journey that those materials have taken to become who they are and therefore implemented. So something like blockchain could be a really fascinating way. Digital technology is very much about like traceability and revealing that journey that a material has taken to live the life that it's living.
Artificial intelligence now has become also much more approachable and available, and we have made use of it. I think it opens up possibilities. This technology can become useful to serve a new paradigm. These machines are put into communication with other systems, and they are therefore responding to these other systems. Artificial intelligence can become a fantastic tool for exploring different perspectives on what intelligence means.
I have this passion for solar, and I think solar should really be embedded in everything in our lives, or really our daily environment. And then my goal is like to how are we going to do this? I'm interested in solar energy because I would say a democratic way of harvesting energy. We have this beautiful source of energy like constantly shining above us, which is called the sun, and it gives us plenty of free energy, and it's available constantly for us. For me, that's kind of like a magical thing, and I think There are not a lot of designers yet that are interested in the solar technology, because I think until now it's been like a very separate thing. We've seen it as a technology. It's something you add onto it. It's needs to be efficient. It was very expensive always. So the access to that technology is quite like difficult to get to, because it's so standardized. So I think there was too much of a gap. But I can also see that this is changing a lot, and more and more designers are involved. My first project, I was fascinated by what color could do more. There I discovered this technology called the dye-sensitized solar cells, which uses the properties of colors to generate energy. So you get this glass surface that is able to, you can integrate it into something. And that for me was like a moment like, wow, this can be everything. So then I made a solar glassware where each cup and each plate is a solar panel. And it was the first moment when I saw like basically everything, every object can be a little source of energy, a little power station. I think in the future we would say that an object or a piece of furniture or a house is broken when it doesn't generate its own energy. Imagine like a table, for example. So the table is an energy source, but it's also when you put your laptop there to work or whatever, it's also charging itself at the same time. The technology to do that already exists. The industry that creates the energy or the furniture or design industry are not collaborating. So it's more about how to intertwine that. It also adds more, how does that communicate? Do we need to sort of add AI, for example, towards that that it talks to each other in a way. So, okay, more energy needs to be there. There's been produced too much. So how can we? I think that also AI is becoming very important there as well. So it's a mix of a lot of things that need to be combined. I think AI is becoming an important future as well of how to work with energy. What kind of objects do we need in the future? How do they get their energy?
For us, the city of the future reconnects to material process present in the pre-industrial city, but through the integration of biotechnology and artificial technology.
I'd like to imagine the city of the future to be like our air bubble, made 99% of air, water, and living organism, and kept together by a very thin membrane that holds it together. I think that the city of the future also will need to deal with the city of the present. It will be the product of a very slow and kind of a meticulous project of remetabolization of the city. Many of these ephemeral, biodegradable, living, active, photosynthetic, soft, wet structures will be erected on top or around of the buildings and infrastructures that we have today, wrapping them and effectively giving them a new life. It's really about shifting the perspective where the intelligence is kind of embedded into the milieu. It's embedded into the fabric of the city.
Between what we call the urban sphere and the biosphere that allow us to perceive flows, artificial and natural, that surround us, read them, and eventually garden them. The first act that the urban dweller needs to do is to cultivate and transform. So not purchase and dispose.
Tomorrow Living will focus on reset, redefining how we live and work, for taking a more conscious approach to consumption and production, to living a more balanced life with less.
I think tomorrow we will be living in a society where beauty becomes the true measure of ecological intelligence.
To be able to develop a pleasurable ecology.
Maybe there will be platform for interspecies alliances and cooperations. Maybe they will be self-sustainable. Maybe we will be able to grow our own food on our, domestic environment. Maybe it decides to stay at the level of materials. It will basically be about the redesign of a technological interface that will allow us to minimize our energetic impact on the planet. It's all of these things together. I think we need to basically maybe emancipate ourselves from the idea that we need new products on the market to actually tackle with these issues. We have to understand design and our practice beyond that need.